Right, could I have your attention, please? Could settle down in the cheap seats. Right, welcome to the October meeting of the New Sheridan Club. Particularly warm welcome to people whose first time this is. A few parish notices before we start this evening's entertainment. The Candlelight Club is meeting on the 10th and 11th. It's Friday and Saturday. Tickets still available, I believe.
Both nights, yeah.
Both nights. Also on the 29th and 30th of October, the Halloween Candlelight Club. On the 20th of October, we have the NSC Virtual Pub Quiz, hosted by James here, I think. On the 4th of December is the New Sheridan Club Christmas Party, details to follow, which means the Glorious Committee haven't come up with a theme yet. So. Next club evening will be 3rd of November, where Luca Jelinek will talk on 3 outrageous notions you were warned about in school. Very mysterious. And now for today's entertainment. The chairman, as you know, the Nobel Prize Committee is dishing out prizes this week, so the chairman is putting in a last-minute bid for the Nobel Peace Prize. Chairman.
Right. We're off. Right. Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and good evening, world. It's thank you for tuning in wherever you are. I think even my mother may be tuning in this evening, so I better be on my best behaviour. For those of you who've attended my talks on previous occasions, I feel it's only fair to warn you that this talk has been researched with the usual level of academic rigour you might expect of me, and doesn't quite cover as many elements of empire as might be covered in other talks of a much more, well, in other spheres which have a much greater relevance this month. I make no claims that this is comprehensive or indeed representative. However, I hope you learned something this evening, if not quite as much as Diana might wish. But rest assured, there'll be none of this. This is Simon Day in the Fast Show. It's in one of his less glorious moments. Let's gloss over that. So tonight we're here to revisit the British Empire exhibition of 1924-25. However, by means of some background, before we first examine why such an exhibition was held, we need to examine why Britain had an empire worth turning into a theme park for a 2-year jamboree of nationalistic imperialism. I shall do this in a somewhat Janet and John fashion. I've spoken here before, and I know that's a sort of level that the members like it. Spot!
Where's Spot the dog?
We must firstly, in simple terms, consider precisely what is an empire. An empire is a term used to describe a group of territories ruled over by a single ruler or state. Empires are built by countries that wish to control lands outside of their borders. Their lands can be close by or even thousands of miles away. For example, the Roman Empire. From the 1st to the 5th century AD, stretched, as you will see, all the way from Britain to Egypt. So it's, however, the question asks itself, why precisely did Britain want an empire? The 16th century is often referred to as the age of discovery. New thinking about the world and better shipbuilding led to more exploration and the discovery of new lands. England, in what is now our harmonious Great Britain, wanted more land overseas where it could build new communities known as colonies. These colonies would provide England with valuable materials such as metal. 1969. Of course, there was also sugar. Hands up on Amstrad. No. Oh well done. Yes.
Yeah, it was affectionately known as a crap strad.
Yes. Well, he's made a bobble to them, doesn't he? And of course, there was tobacco, which they could also sell to other countries and young children. The colonies also offered money-making opportunities for wealthy Englishmen and provided England's poor and unemployed with new places to live and new jobs. The first English colonies were in North America, at the time known as the New World. In 1858, Sir Walter Raleigh, who later invented the push bike, tried and failed to build an English settlement, but it wasn't until 1607 that Captain John Smith founded the first permanent English colony in Jamestown, Virginia. Over time, indeed, over time the English would claim more and more territories. I told you I was keeping it nice and simple. This sometimes meant fighting with other European nations to take over colonies. Still ongoing. It's over the course of the 17th and 18th centuries, England gained major colonies in North America and further south in the West Indies, known today as the Caribbean islands. But not always. Trading settlements were also created in India by a company called the East India Company. The EIC became so powerful, it allowed England to control the trade of luxury goods such as spices, cotton, silk and tea from India and China. The years 1775 to 1783 were a turning point in British history, as the nation lost a large part of its empire in the American War of Independence. Here we see the Battle of Bunker's Hill.
Tax dodgers.
Yeah, well.
Boo hiss.
Feeling American rather than British, and resentful of sending money back to Britain, 13 colonies in North America united and fought to be free of British rule. With the help of Spain, France and the Netherlands, they won the war and gained independence, becoming the United States of America, thus marking the end of what is now called the First British Empire. Although Britain had lost a huge part of its North American territories, it claimed new lands in the 18th and early 19th centuries, forming the Second British Empire, as we see here. Colonies were founded in parts of Australia, and later Trinidad and Ceylon, Singapore and Hong Kong in China, as well as other parts of Asia. From 1881 to 1902, Britain competed with other European empire builders in what became known as a scramble for Africa. And by the early 1900s, huge parts of Africa, including Egypt, Kenya, Nigeria, and large parts of southern Africa, all came under British rule. The British Empire was larger and more powerful than ever. At its height, in 1922, it was the largest empire the world had ever seen, covering around a quarter of the Earth's land surface and ruling over 458 million people. As such, Britain thought it might like to hold an exhibition to mark such global dominance. The empire comes in for much criticism in certain circles nowadays. When the empire was being built, British people largely believed they were doing the right thing. In their eyes, they were improving and developing lands and bringing order to countries which, due to the prevailing attitude of many people at the time, they thought were uncivilized and backward. However, thankfully, attitudes which prevailed at the time of empire have changed amongst most British people nowadays. I say most. Which brings us neatly to the subject of our talk this evening, the British Empire exhibition of 1924-25. Held in 1924 with the purpose to stimulate trade, strengthen bonds that bind mother country to her sister states and daughters, to bring into closer contact the one with the other, to enable all those who owe allegiance to the British flag to meet on common ground and learn to know each other. It's not all been good. The British Empire was the largest exhibition ever staged anywhere in the world, costing some £10 million to create. In the days before cheap international travel became the blight of those whose warrior-like tendencies tend to be prefixed by the somewhat damning eco nowadays, the only way to see the delights of empire for the majority of the people of the United Kingdom was to visit the British Empire exhibition, certainly in the 1920s. Early commercially available televisions, without commercials, it goes without saying, were some way off the radar until John Logie Baird came up with his big idea. Although it would be another 50 years until Mahabharat and Neighbours reached our screens, showing us what life was really like in the more far-flung outposts of empire. This was probably rather more like it. With such factors to the fore, the exhibition was a resounding success. It was opened on St George's Day, 1924, by King George V and Queen Mary. And of the 58 countries the British Empire contained in 1924, 56 were represented. Here we see what are described as principal types of mankind, many of whom were represented at the exhibition, and many of whom I can imagine, even today, would still appear particularly exotic, especially in Brent. Only Gambia, the pictures we can see here, illustrates a visit of the British administrator in the Gambia interviewing a native chief. An exercise which we can see here actually necessitates a military band being present. And of course, Gibraltar, who saw fit not to show their wares, peanuts and ape faeces not being thought by the respective countries' boards of trade sufficient to entice tourists in the 1920s. The exhibition ran over the summer of 1924 and 25 and attracted a colossal 27 million visitors through its gates of what is now the People's Republic of Brent. The exhibition was administered by many of the great and the good of their day, as we see here. Quite small, I didn't wish to illustrate it, but it's but they were thoughtfully depicted, as you can see here, in glorious black and white over 7 moderately indulgent pages in the official exhibition guide. Many of the chaps, for it is mostly chaps, appear to have had a good war, based on their survival and rank, if nothing else. 28 of the 51 had some form of facial hair. The majority sporting impressive Kitcheners.
Matches the women.
And a mere 2 were ladies. One, a Mrs. C.C. Grove, was seen fit to be offered the position of a secretary of a women's section. Mrs. Grove doesn't look particularly happy with her lot, I would surmise. Then again, the women's liberation movement didn't really make much headway until the 1960s, and I doubt they gave her a great deal to do other than make the tea. In spite of its empire-wide remit, only one non-white face appears amongst the dignitaries. Plus ça change, plus à la même chose, as I'm sure they say in the Equalities and Human Rights Commission even today. Especially in France, one might imagine. This gentleman was perhaps introduced to add some diversity. It was the 1920s after all. I note from other documents examined that this gentleman's input to the planning meetings was minimal. However, I imagine he may have been rarely called because the chairman couldn't pronounce the chap's name. And I sense this one may have some difficulty. Get stuck with Sri Lankan names as well. So, here we see the exhibition site. To offer some by means of illustration, Wembley Park Station is about here. This would be, I presume, what is now called Wembley Way. And here you will see the stadium, specially built for the occasion. The 56 exhibition pavilions seemed to contain much of a muchness. Think your average county show, but on a grander scale, and you'll probably get some idea. However, with admission charges for the majority of the pavilions, one can imagine it sharpened the incentive of the host countries somewhat to show their nations in the most imaginative and entertaining style. Food, transport, flora and fauna all seem to feature quite heavily in almost every pavilion. Cinemas also proved popular, with the modus operandi of save money on expensive exhibits by showing cinematographic representations of the diverse experiences you might encounter if you had the time, money and wherewithal to visit, seem to have been almost universally adopted. They're probably very cheap to produce as well. There were, however, some notable highlights. These included the pavilion of the Tanganyika territory, formerly known as German East Africa, which showed exhibits of coffee and sisal, the latter making up the base constituent of the bristle dartboard, first produced some 8 years after the exhibition commenced. Here we have the late great Jockey Wilson, who of course many may remember also appeared on Top of the Pops with Dexy's Midnight Runners to illustrate the song Jackie Wilson Said. As to whether or not it was ever a joke they put the picture of Jockey Wilson up, or they basically just got it wrong, I've no idea, but it was indeed Jockey, although not shown with quite as much refreshment. Queues must have formed as far as Neasden to see such wondrous bounty close at hand. By way of contrast, the grounds of the New Zealand pavilion, depicted here, featured an actual carved Maori house, as we see on the left, in their gardens, which apparently was originally completed in 1874 upon the ratification of peace between two tribes which had previously been at war for many years. Quite what the indigenous warrior classes thought to this shameless bout of imperialistic looting some 50 years later isn't recorded, but one can imagine they were not best pleased, if only by observing their subsequent competitive nature on the field of rugby union. With the exception of the Empire Stadium, the palaces of industry and engineering were the two largest edifices constructed for the exhibition. The shell of a palace of industry is the only remaining building from the exhibition remaining today on the same site, whilst the Palace of Engineering contained the largest display of plant and machinery ever seen under one roof. And the organisers were keen to display something of interest to everyone. Even women, it would appear. According to the guidebook, which I brought with me, have I got it here? Yes. Amazing what one can pick up on eBay nowadays. This is an original copy of the exhibition guide. And in it, it said, it suggested women will no doubt be particularly interested in the practical demonstrations of the use of electricity in the home. This was some time after the event, but attitudes took some time to change.
Notice her thought bubble is empty.
Indeed.
I think emotion overwhelms thought, hasn't it?
The exhibition guide was readily available on the site for a price, as indeed it is on eBay nowadays. This being a different covered version. And in it, it listed in its contents 1,001 highlights, which no visitor with significantly more spare time and money than was generally the prevailing case in the 1920s should miss. These included a sheep shearing shed, which presumably proved quite a burden to anyone working on the information desk encumbered with a speech impediment. For their entertainment and viewing pleasure, children from North and South London could look on in wonder at the biggest knife in the world in the Palace of Industry, containing a mind-boggling 1,924 blades. Sadly, the illustration only has two, but amazing what you can pick up at the exhibition there. It's penknives for all. The 1,924 blades represented one for each year of the Christian era. A full-size sculpture in butter of the most stylish, later to be Nazi sympathiser ever to be king, the Prince of Wales, was depicted on horseback. Possibly something like the one on the left. Probably not like the thing on the right, picture on the right. So. Who was also created, would you believe, and for those with a keen interest in craftsmanship, at its most dexterous. You could observe a pearl necklace being produced entirely by hand courtesy of a lady from Ceylon.
Cracks.
Don't look it up. Don't look it up. For the less cerebral visitor, I should tell a story at this point. I actually went to a wedding once, and I had a friend who was basically doing the talk, and let's hope that his wife isn't looking this evening. He said apparently he'd bought his wife a pair of pearl earrings, and his mother-in-law, in all their innocence, said, "Well, the earrings are fine." He said, "But when are you going to give her a pearl necklace?" And I mean, I just absolutely wet myself. Anyway, for the less cerebral visitor, the exhibition also included an amusement park, as you'll see here. A quite large construction, which purported to be the largest and most comprehensive pleasure park known to history. Highlights were said to include Dodgem, a new electronic attraction, and a children's section featuring games of Bunty Pulls the Swings, Swanee River, and Christmas trees. With attractions such as these, it's little wonder the exhibition attracted 27 million people. All this for sixpence. How could you refuse? Visitors of a more lecherous nature could ogle women for their perverted pleasure in what was known as the Palace of Beauty, an exhibition showing living presentments of the 10 most beautiful women known to history, the ladies having been chosen for their natural resemblance to the women they are intended to represent. These included Nell Gwynn, Madame Pompadour, Cleopatra, Mary Queen of Scots, but sadly, not the Empress of India, who failed to make the cut on this occasion. Tutankhamun's tomb, complete with reproduction artifacts, was also recreated, presumably without the hassle of the befezed hawkers making a nuisance of themselves one might have encountered in Egypt, offering hospitality and poor quality, unpriced mother-of-pearl boxes, of which I seem to encounter nothing else, to the unsuspecting visitor. Amongst the more notable exhibits at the fairground was an attraction called the Death Ring. Something the guide describes as a cup-shaped steel cage in which a motorcyclist, sometimes 3, ride round the top of a track in a horizontal fashion and parallel to the ground. No mention is made in the guide as to whether or not any of the riders actually fell to their death, but no motorcyclist could surely demonstrate a greater love for empire than sacrificing his own life for the entertainment of others. The highlight of the exhibition site was, of course, the stadium itself. The guide boasts there is not in all England a modern building that can compete with the Empire Stadium in the effect it creates upon the minds of a spectator. The stadium season at the exhibition began with Empire Week, which featured concerts of massed bands and the Empire Thanksgiving service, which presumably did exactly what it said on the poster. Other highlights included a choir of 10,000, the world's largest gathering of trained voices, which played 5 times at the exhibition during the summer of 1924. An international rodeo held in the arena for 2 weeks in June 1924 attracted many of the world's finest rodeo riders, no doubt enticed by the opportunity to win a share of £20,000 in prizes, which were awarded during the fortnight. A much heralded pageant of empire, which featured what were described as dramatic representations of the most thrilling episodes in the history of Empire, also featured in the stadium's highlights. One presumes the Indian famines of the late 19th century, in which at least 10 million people died, and the Balfour Declaration of 1917, but to name but two blemishes on Britain's otherwise considered to be at the time faultless complexion, were conveniently airbrushed from the version of the Empire's history depicted in the pageant. In spite of the success of the exhibition itself, the majority of the buildings which made up the exhibition site were only ever intended to be temporary constructions, destined to be sold for scrap following the exhibition's closure in 1925. Of the main buildings on site, the Palace of Engineering, as you'll see here, survived until the early 1970s, and the British Government Pavilion, described by none other than Sir John Betjeman as the grandest palace of them all, survived until 1973, just after his visit to the pavilion during the filming of Metroland. The Palace of Arts survived until December 2004, spending its latter years as a theatrical props warehouse, as anybody who's ever seen Betjeman's Metroland will recall. Today, only the Palace of Industry survives. I think I may have taken this on a visit revisiting all the locations, well, as a selection of Betjeman's locations of Metroland. And it now masquerades as a distribution depot for the home delivery network. The only clues to its previous use being a repeating lion's head motif which adorns the building's facade, sadly not captured here. Somewhat surprisingly, the centrepiece of the exhibition, the Empire Stadium. The name Empire Stadium, incidentally, stuck until 1972 and was subsequently rebranded Wembley Stadium, as it is today. And that was also due to be destroyed after the exhibition. It was saved from demolition by a Scot, Sir James Stevenson, which seems somewhat ironic, as the stadium was almost destroyed by Scots following the football team's victory over England in 1977 in the much lamented Home Internationals Association football tournament. Razed to the ground in 2003, only to be replaced by what is, in my opinion, a modern soulless construction, which now stands on the site of the old stadium. The old Wembley is much missed, if only for the sights of the Twin Towers one viewed when approaching the stadium from Wembley Park Station. Providing the technology works, we've now got a short video, Q Clayton, it's of the exhibition, thoughtfully uploaded to YouTube by the Smithsonian Institute and cunningly downloaded by your speaker yesterday evening. So, it only lasts about 3 or 4 minutes.
But what we have to do.
I think it's. Can we possibly turn the sound up?
No.
No. Okay.
There's no sound coming out of this computer.
Oh right. Okay. Well, there we go. We'll get an illustration anyway. It's.
Coloring 1924. That's probably
I think this was building the stadium site. Well, these were some of the Palace of Industry and what have you. And here's the stadium. I think it was the opening.
Pay your £6 and get a record flogging.
You would be colorised later on. So
Yes. If we'd had sound, you might actually have learned something here today. But it's anyway.
Oh, heaven forbid.
No, well, perish thought. Yes, it's.
Press the button. That's it. Didn't really get the crowd from the stand, did they?
Social distance.
It was a smoking ban. Maybe you could turn up with some pipes.
So, I mean, yes, you can see it was a very well attended sort of event. I mean, it was must have been quite something.
Oh, new housing solutions.
Nice hat.
Yeah.
Oh, how the colonials pass that time.
First sweatshops there.
Yes, this was
Yes.
a miniature train which went round the site. And,
No, take me off, take me off. I'm too young to go.
Going backwards.
See, I always mind distinct.
Hang on, that's like normal. This is a common trend these days. They're that crowded.
I imagine seeing things. You can have any other colour as long as it's black.
so there you go. The sort of the view of the stadium didn't really change for many years, although they obviously put a roof on parts of it at some point.
There's more graffiti as well.
Right. There we go.
Oh, can we
Anyway.
gun the trucks?
I hope this has given you some sort of flavour of the exhibition. Anyway, the sound would have helped, but it is easily available on YouTube if you're interested. So, as we've seen, the intrinsic nature of the British Empire exhibition could be perceived as as somewhat sexist and imperialistic, but it was of its time, and due to the prevailing attitudes of the day, one might readily surmise that such attitudes are pretty much par for the course. It's interesting to note that of other subsequent national exhibitions held in Britain, you'll see the Festival of Britain on the left from, was it 1953, of which the Festival Hall, I don't think exactly what the remains of the Festival of Britain. The Festival Hall's obviously still there, as you see here, and obviously the South Banks are still bustling, but the dome-type structure.
Jubilee Gardens now, isn't it?
Yes, it has gone, but anyway, so the Festival of Britain and the Dome. The Festival of Britain attracted a mere 6 million, and the Dome 6.5 million. In light of that, the Empire exhibition did pretty well with attendances, and I think it must have been pretty much a jolly good show. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you.
So, do we have any questions?
Please no. I doubt I'd add a great deal to it. It must have been quite something. I went to the Millennium Dome. My father had been to the Festival of Britain in '53, and I just feel, it's very easy to be rude about the Dome, but I mean, whatever it cost, £20-25 at the time, At least I could say that I went, and you don't forget, and obviously the Festival Hall is still sort of a wonderful thing that has remained from the Festival of Britain. And this is a sad thing, you see. They could easily have kept the Twin Towers at Wembley.
I thought they had.
Or no. They could have recreated them. They could have just rebuilt 2 more Twin Towers, so it's forever the Twin Towers of Wembley. Instead, they've got the arch over the top.
I used to be able to see it from my bedroom.
Yeah, and of course they illuminate it, whether or not there's something particularly of the moment going on. It's but it's not the same. It's it's you know, the modern stadium is obviously it's much more disabled friendly and has slightly better seats, not brilliant, rather more corporate hospitality in there, rather less facilities to stand, and rather less facility space for sort of Scots to invade it sort of occasionally. But it's
But a lot of corporate hospitality.
yes, it's but it's just not the same. I don't mind going there. I go there under sufferance because it's the only place you can go and see certain things. But it's not Wembley as it was. So there we go. Any more for any more? Or are we all done? Can I have a drink now?
Thank you very much, Chairman.
Outstanding talk, Chairman. Outstanding.
Thank you very much. It's, thank you. Right. Well, there we go. We missed the Welsh bit.
Thanks to all watching at home. Sorry about the brief interruption to the picture. Normal service resumed.
Where, is it illustrating how well...